Hi, everybody. My name is Suzanne Lopez, and I'm a rehearsal director with the Joffrey Ballet. And I am here joined by three incredible women who are taking part in a project called Bertha. And we have with us Cathy Marston, who is the choreographer. We have Christine Rocas, who is the dancer and playing the role of Bertha. And we have Errollyn Wallen, who is the composer of music. So welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining me. Cathy, I'd love to start with you. Cathy choreographed Jane Eyre, which we did in our last season. And can we talk a little bit about who Bertha is? Let's first discuss this character, and then we can move on to the project.
Sure. So perhaps Bertha is best known as the woman or the wife in the attic. In the story of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, the main guy, Rochester, Mr. Rochester, there's a love relationship develops between him and Jane Eyre, but there's this sort of mysterious laughing that goes on at night. Something's going on in this manor house in the middle of Yorkshire that doesn't seem quite right to Jane, and it's a big secret. But the long and short of it is that Mr. Rochester is already married, and he's married to this lady called Bertha, and he tries to marry Jane, and it all comes out in the church in the wedding. Bertha's, I think it's her stepbrother or her half brother, I forget which, turns up, and when the vicar says, has anyone got any objections, he sort of storms into the church and says, yes, Rochester is already married. And it all comes out. And it seems that Bertha has been kept in the attic for around 10 years. And she came from the Caribbean before. He was there. It's a long story I won't go into, but he calls her mad. I mean, in Jane Eyre, they really talk about her in terms of her being this sort of wild animal woman who's completely lost it and is sort of, violent and crazed. And when I made the ballet of Jane Eyre, or Northern Ballet originally, and then I restaged it on Joffrey, I always loved this character of Bertha. And I because, it's a 2-hour ballet, it's not, you have to fit it in, or it's even an hour and a half, you fit the story in. I could never give Bertha as much stage time as I felt that the character deserved. The ballet is called Jane Eyre, and Bertha's role in it was significant, or is significant, and she has some great moments, really dramatic moments that maybe Christine will talk about in a bit. But you couldn't really go into her story, and it's really the same in the novel, that you don't ever hear her perspective on the whole situation. And when I staged Jane Eyre on Joffrey Ballet, Christine and I got talking about the part, and she had done a lot of research, and indeed there is lots to read about Bertha. Many people before me have studied her, have looked at the clues in the text and sort of gone back in time, tried to work out what her story was. And many feel that she is hard done by as a character, that her voice should be heard. And one of those people is another writer called Jean Rhys, who wrote an incredible novel, which is kind of a masterpiece, a classic in its own right, called The Wild Sargasso Sea. And she writes that story as a kind of prequel to Jane Eyre, and she writes it through different voices, one of them being Bertha's own voice, one of them Rochester has a sort of section, and so on. Actually, she gives Bertha another name. She imagines that Bertha's original name is Antoinette, and as part of this sort of reshaping of Antoinette, Rochester decides that he likes the name Bertha better and just starts calling her Bertha, which is interesting in itself. So really, when I think Christine had read the book, I read The Wild Sargasso Sea when we were working on Jane Eyre, and we got talking about it. And so when in this COVID period, Ashley, director of Joffrey Ballet, Ashley Wheater, and I were talking about Joffrey's digital program, I said, I really would love to develop that Bertha ballet that I've had in my head. I've always felt I'd like to make another ballet on Bertha. And I said, how about you find an attic in Chicago and we make this a film on location with Christine. And he loved the idea, and it rolled from there.
That's great. That's great. And Christine, let's bring you into this conversation, talking a little bit about what your journey was with this role. And you're an avid reader, so you certainly knew the story of Jane Eyre well, but how you approached this particular character. Christine is a fantastic actor in any role, but I think her approach to this character in particular may have been a little bit more difficult of a journey. So maybe you can chat about that a little.
So Jane Eyre actually is my favorite classic. I read it. It was a recommendation to me by one of the company artists back in the day, and it quickly became a favorite of mine. So I reread it a few times actually. So when I found out that Jane Eyre was coming to Chicago, to Joffrey, I was really excited because I was just really attached to the novel, and I was just like so excited and was already kind of imagining what it's going to look like with the company. And it was even more exciting to find out that I was going to dance the role of Bertha, because it was a challenge, an exciting challenge, because it's very much outside of my comfort zone as far as acting a role or that. Oh, someone's calling. So it was very much a challenge. It was very much outside of my comfort zone. I was always used to more characters that the emotions range from like very much in love to then sad and heartbroken, like say Juliet or Giselle. And then we had Anna Karenina also, but mostly driven by love and the complex, emotions that go into that. But as far as Bertha goes, I needed to kind of transform my mindset. Her mind felt very much unrelatable to me in that moment, to the point where like her mind, I can imagine that her mind was really going crazy being locked up in an attic, but I have not had that same personal experiences to just like try to like take out of myself. So actually it was very helpful talking to Michael Moritz, our pianist. He is also an avid reader, and he introduced me to the Wide Sargasso Sea. And as we know, in the novel of Jane Eyre, her voice isn't very much heard. You can only hear like snippets and outbursts of the presence of Bertha. It's always kind of a looming presence in the whole book, but when she comes forward, she really comes forward. But as far as the context, you don't really hear much about Bertha's perspective in Jane Eyre. So then I got to read The Wide Sargasso Sea, and from there, her character developed in me a lot more. I've imagined from her childhood what it must have felt like to feel like an outsider in her own Caribbean community, being of mixed race, and everybody was calling her really awful names, and her family, and she already has a sick brother, and her mom was always rumored to be sick also. So already the complexity of that, of her growing up, already built a lot of context for me. And that was really exciting to like, as I'm reading, because I knew I was going to be Bertha, feelings already started to stir up inside me. And then, which meant it was a little bit easier to bring forward with the vocabulary that we had. So that was long.
No, it's great. That's really great. I mean, I think
Amazing. But it was fun. It was really fun.
I think it's one of the things that being in the studio with both of you, well, we're on we're on a camera with Cathy, but in the studio with Christine and on a camera with Cathy, is that you both approach work with, or at least this work and Jane Eyre, with words. That words are very important, that the motivation for you, Christine, you needed to read something that you could sort of ingest and then make something that felt personal to you. And Cathy, you often start your work with a list of words and things that sort of transpire and become choreography. Can you talk about that a little bit, just your process?
Sure. So I mean, you're right. I start very often from literature, sometimes biography, but even when I don't have someone else's words, like Charlotte Bronte's in front of me, I'll start writing, as you say, lists of words, and I'll kind of simplify, or not simplify, reduce everything, meaning intensify everything to simple word lists, like adjectives, adverbs that can provoke movement in the creation of the actual choreography. And I guess that's also just getting down to the essence of what a story is about. And I remember then taking that to Errollyn as well in this case, like trying to work out what is it that is getting to Bertha more than anything. And you can sort of just bring it down to simple words, and then from those simple words, take it out into the new form of expression, in this case, dance and music. And when I'm beginning a ballet with dancers in the studio, very often, even before we start work with the music and actually forming a scene, we'll work from these word lists to create a movement vocabulary. And that's not to say that I expect or even want that the audience members will be able to read the movement as they can read words. But when it really works, it works because the dancers know exactly what they are expressing with each and every single step or movement. And I loved Christine for that, because she totally got it. And I think we've sort of clicked on that level, that we both really need to be precise about what and why every little thing exists in the piece, and then you can make it dance, make it sing, make it express itself, if you really know what's behind it and underneath it.
That there's not a wasted step. There's not a step just for doing a step. It all has meaning behind it, and it keeps it honest, which is really great to watch.
And you can see when it's not. I mean, it's been lovely to have the time, even though it's on Zoom and it's slightly odd to not be in the studio, but working with you in the studio and with the other dancers, you can say, okay, there's something I don't believe about that, and you can tell, because everything else is so believable. You can see the bits that's not quite right, and we all know, okay, why is that not quite right? What is it that's not reading there?
And Cathy, how did you and Errollyn connect for this project?
So I have known Errollyn since I was a student at the Royal Ballet School, aged about 17. And one of my best friends, Tom Sapsford, I'm not quite sure how Tom and Errollyn first met, but Tom and I were both young choreographers. And he said to me one night, there's this concert of a composer that I like in London Bridge. If you don't know London, so the Royal Ballet School is in sort of West, or was in West London, and London Bridge is, all of 20 minutes on the underground, but it felt like a foreign country at that time. So we went off to London Bridge to this concert, and Errollyn has this amazing voice, and she was singing and playing piano, and in the way that only 17-year-olds could possibly do. Tom and I got up and did an impromptu dance performance.
Wow.
This concert. So you understand that those things then remain with you. And
Sure.
Tom actually worked with Errollyn several times as a choreographer, with Errollyn composing music. And then now he's a professor of Latin and Greek. I'm very proud of him. And I said to him, do you think Errollyn would be up for this project? Because I just felt like, Errollyn comes, I think you were born in the Caribbean, is that right, Errollyn? You grew up in the UK, I know that.
Yes, but yes, Belize.
Belize, yeah. I sort of felt like she might understand this sort of voice, really, that we were after. And I wanted to get a sense of this kind of Caribbean sound versus this British sound, and the coming together and the kind of juxtaposition of those two worlds that were kind of clashing or fusing in some way in Bertha's head as she's sort of on her own in the attic. So I asked her, and Errollyn, even though she's super busy with all sorts of projects, has managed to squeeze it in.
Yes, I think there's something quite fated about this project, and that all of us, we're all connected to Jane. Jane Eyre was the first proper book I read, and I was only 5, so there's no way that I understood it, but I loved that book. But when we were making this ballet, I went back and read it as an adult, and it was just fantastic. And as it happened last year, I'd read the World's SOC, and so I was sort of primed. And just before this, I'd written a piece for Solo Viola about this character Lavinia, who's in my opera, but similar, a character you want to give space. I gave her space, but she too was consumed sort of with this jealousy and this passion for somebody, and then to understand what happens when you're trapped and you have this passion, and you're wronged in some way. So it was so fantastic for me to work on this with you, Cathy. So I must thank you.
Thank you.
And Errollyn, can you talk a little bit about the instruments that you use? Because I think it's really, I mean, first of all, this was all done. None of us are in the same place. Christine and I are in the same place, but then Cathy's in Switzerland, Errollyn's in the UK. We're all around. So, so I think it was, we've made everything work, and it's kind of, this time has shown us everything that we can do. But I think because of lockdowns and all these things, you were perhaps limited in what you could use, and it's a short piece too, but maybe can you talk about those choices that you made musically?
Well, speaking with Cathy, this idea of getting this other sound world, maybe from the Caribbean, I suddenly thought about an instrument that I really did want to explore more. It's called a hand pan, and it's sort of a cross between a steel pan and a sort of a gong, but they're generally only used, they're more used in pop music, music where maybe the chordal structure is simple. So I believe we've sort of created something out of necessity that's brought an instrument that's never been written before. The performer was Rosie Bergonzi, and I'd seen her play in a workshop of mine, and I thought I must write for that instrument. And then the violin, Sarah Tricky for me, and I'd never worked with her before, but came highly recommended from Cathy. So I was going into it sort of rather experimentally, but I had a sense that these two different sound worlds would work well. But it was quite, I was 700 miles away from the studio when it's being recorded, but I could zoom in. But I had worked with Rose before, and Sarah is just a phenomenal violinist. I can't tell you how, and Jerry O'Riordan recorded it. So together we made it all work. But the music, I studied the brief quite closely. I hope Cathy, it's really marked in minutes and seconds. And so I tried to follow it very closely. But at the same time, the music has to breathe. It has to be expressive. There's rubato. There's, slowing down and speeding up. So it was trying to understand, the scenario and to convey that. And I know that, I'm sure the first draft I sent must have seemed very straight. It's very thorny music on the whole. But
that's a good word for it. It's thorny, yeah.
Very thorny, and I was surprised it was coming out, but I was trying to get to the truth of Bertha. But were you surprised by it, by the music?
I'm always surprised by it. It's one of the sort of amazing things about collaborating with composers is that my usual process, which was the case here, is that I will do the research and sort of make my word list, and also make a scenario, which, as Errollyn said, is then split up into timings. And in this case, because the piece is literally 6 minutes, the timings are very small. And it's like you called it a mini concerto. It kind of is. It's got lots of different sort of sections and moments. And that's partly because Bertha's mind is so fractured, I felt, in in this sort of enclosed space for this amount of time. It's not a fluid structure at all. I wanted to get this sense of a voice this way and a voice this way and a memory here and then a reality there. And so it probably wasn't the simplest scenario to work for because it was so pernickety. But anyway, we talked about it and that's what it was. And I think we got that it was about jealousy. I think that was the sort of key word for Errollyn and I, was even if you didn't know the backstory, the story of Jane Eyre, any of those things, it's essentially about someone who's been wronged, as you said. It's someone Bertha was in love with Rochester, he wronged her and she's with someone else, or he's with someone else. And it's that, I think we can all identify with that awful feeling of jealousy when your mind kind of caves in and grows thorns. I think that's a brilliant word. But whenever you get music, then you've sort of sent this through. And it's not that I ever know what I imagine something to sound like in my head, but it's always such a surprise when it comes back, and a brilliant surprise. And I loved it. And it has got all of this sort of sharp turns in it. And then suddenly it breaks out into this lovely melody that I actually wondered if it was an authentic folk song from the Caribbean. You said you've made it up as a folk song, I think. But it's very believable, and it has the sense that I think I wrote in the scenario, she imagines her mother stroking her hair. And it sounds exactly like that to me. And also with the hand pans, this sort of gentle kind of, how do you describe that? Very gentle percussive instrument.
Yes, maybe the hand. Yes, it was. I just do think that, you know, this ballet, the story, your understanding of it has really brought something out new. And also, I was very fortunate. I zoomed into rehearsal. Do you remember? I remember looking. We were looking. So that was also very, very important to me to see. To see you both there, actually, all three there, and just to get the atmosphere of the room, even where where you were creating the dance. So
yeah.
And I think that this experience, while it's been all on Zoom, it's also unique in that it was completely made to be a film. This is not ever really meant to be shown on stage, and so perhaps, using this opportunity to only see it on camera. Cathy has only ever worked on this, and she will only ever see it on camera. Maybe makes it unique in that that's how the audience is going to see it too. So
I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I this year has brought several Zoom projects forward, and I mean, a year ago I would have been thinking, oh, I'm not sure if I can do that, or is that the right thing to do? And necessity drives us.
Absolutely.
And it's actually incredible what you can do. I mean, really, glass half full. It really is something quite amazing to see what's possible. And like you say, you're seeing it in this sort of two-dimensional way anyway. I don't know how I'd feel about it if I was making a ballet for the stage on Zoom and never would see it beforehand in person. That would be a different story, but never say never.
Let's hope we don't have to find out.
Yeah. But I tell you, it's something that I realized I'm not finished with Bertha yet. So it's sort of, it feels to me as if this ballet or this film is sort of a scene that almost happens behind the ballet of Jane Eyre, or in another room or above, actually. Because we took a very precise moment in the story of Jane Eyre. There's a moment in the novel where Bertha goes down to Jane's bedroom in the middle of the night, and the wedding dress that she's about to wear the next day is hanging there, and Bertha takes the veil and rips it in half. And then so I imagined Bertha then running back up to her attic and how she would feel then. So that is the moment in time that this film happens. But I do feel ever more intrigued by her as a character, and particularly with the Wild Sargasso Sea giving such rich backstory, I suppose. I feel like, I kind of want to make a longer piece in real life one day.
So this is just part one, maybe.
Let's see, a prequel to a prequel, or all of those things.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. I find you all incredibly inspiring, and this has been such a great project to work on, and hope our audiences enjoy the premiere of our film, Bertha. So thank you so much.
Thank you.